and welcome to Unwarranted Music Opinions, the show in which three music nerds shove music into each other's ear holes.
Damn it.
And just ensure that they go straight through the brain and it comes out the mouth in opinions. I'm June Lindberg, here with Brian Courtney.
I don't know why it bothers me so much, but I hate it.
And Chaz Jenkins.
It's just awful imagery. Like, I don't want to see June just shove melodies in my ear.
There will be no
That's
insertion.
Where they go. They continue. They will never leave. Today's episode is a sequel episode where we talk about artists that we have already discussed on the show, whether it was 3 weeks ago or literally 2 years ago at this point.
And we can do old albums or future albums.
According to, I think, was that you, Ryan, last time?
Who else? Who else would say that?
Yeah, so we're going to kick things off with my pick. Not that long ago, we talked about debut home recordings by Beck, Golden Feelings. And what I wanted to show with that record was that there was more to that early Beck than just gimmicky weirdness. The album I chose for this week, One Foot in the Grave, is even further along the line of it's not a gimmick. Really what we have is a folk record. There are still a couple whacked out crazy tracks on here, but it's for the most part a folk or folk rock.
I would call it more like a lo-fi blues record. I got more blues than there's some folk, but I got a lot of blues on this one personally.
There was a lot of bluesy influence and guitar playing, but looking through the track list,
I think you could. It's kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily half and half, but there's a lot of blues in here. I would argue as well.
Yeah, so this is the record that he recorded before, but released fairly quickly after his actual breakthrough record, Mellow Gold, which had Loser on it, and just elevated him into just being one of the hallmarks of 90s weird alternative music.
Facts.
Also, it's extremely different to what we've done on the show so far, the two albums.
I have been a fan of this album for a long time. It's one of my favorite Beck records.
Really?
I love the atmosphere. I love the playing. I love the lyrics. So I'm excited to see what you all think.
Well, so as we mentioned beforehand in our previous Beck discussion, me and June, huge Beck nerds growing up in high school. That's like one of the main artists that we bonded over was Beck. I've never heard this album, actually. This is one of the few Beck records I've not heard. There's a couple more that I've like dipped through his whole discography. So this was pleasant to come to, not ever hearing it. Right off the bat, the way I would describe this record is like a much, much better Golden Feelings. Because there's lo-fi-ness, acoustic guitar, scuzzy, electric. But there's way more variety in the instrumentation. That was one of my problems with Golden Feelings. It felt just really one note in the instrumentation. But here there's drums on a few tracks. There's some tracks with just an acoustic guitar, the scuzzy electric guitar, some bass on a few tracks. But it's all spread throughout, so it never feels one note. Really love that. This just, again, proves how great of a lyricist and songwriter Beck is. And as you mentioned, June, this just proves further the fact that, I'm sure for the time, that Beck was just not a one-trick pony or just some weird lo-fi artist. No, the dude's a legit musician. And what blew my mind the most about this record was the lyrical content. And I think that's just what really elevated it for me, because the first couple listens, it was just like, this is a pretty good lo-fi blues album, But then I read through the lyrics. I was
what is that voice?
I don't know why you were like a mobster.
That was my inner voice when I think about these albums. But then I read through the lyrics and I was like, oh shit, this album's pretty fucking good, actually.
Yo, Tony, get in here.
You gotta read these poetries, man. Sometimes they can get a little ridiculous, but it's early 90s Beck. Of course, we're gonna get some ridiculous lyricism, but there's some legitimate emotional moments on here, and some really cool metaphors that are fun to pick through. Big one being cyanide breath mint, which at first glance feels like a stupid fucking song title, but no, it's actually a really cool metaphor in the lyrics about being in a record label and trying to make it in the music industry. I was really surprised by the lyrics on that song. Favorite track is Hollow Log, though. I feel like
That's a great song.
That is the best melody, best vocal delivery from Beck, although his vocals across the board are some of his best, at least in his acoustic days. But Hollow Log really stuck with me. Just something about that track, just the delivery, the lyrics, amazing. To talk about some of my complaints with the record, pacing is a little wonky towards the back half. I feel like we stick the landing with the atmospheric conditions, but we kind of just slow a little bit down with Outcome, Girls' Dreams, and Painted Eyelids. Although I really do like...
Oh,
wait, no.
That was a terrible take. Those 3 songs are amazing.
Wait, let me rephrase that. Girl Dreams and Painted Islands, just a little wonky for me. Outcome is fucking awesome. Forgot about that one. But that is like Quaaludes the musical, that fucking song. Like, that song just is bananas. I love the melody on that. Outcome is different than I expect. Awesome. Forgot about that track.
The best part about that song is I don't know the name of the guy who does vocals alongside Beck, actually, but
I'm
he's on
presuming
a
it's the
couple
guy
tracks here.
On the album cover.
It's the guy in the album cover, but the best part of Outcome is the please. It's like that like high nasally bit on the chorus. There's a lot actually of great vocal interplay on this record between
surprisingly
Beck, that guy who I don't know the name of, and then Calvin Johnson when he appears.
It's Sam Jane.
Sam Jane.
Is that Sam Jane?
Yeah, that's the only other credited vocals on the album.
My biggest issue is like, the pacing's a little wonky, and just some tracks just are kind of weak in comparison. Like, not a huge fan of 14 Rivers, 14 Floods. Just kind of an okay track. It's just an okay track. Like, no, it doesn't really bring a lot to the table that other tracks do. I feel like He's a Mighty Glitter is a better bluesier cut and a good opener.
I would agree, but 14 Rivers, 14 Floods is like the oldest. Like, that sounds like just a classic fucking blues song, or just, it's really, because it's kind of like about a lot of things. It's kind of telling a story that probably has a bigger point to it than I'm reading it. It could be reading into.
But I mean, this album has got some high highs. I mean, Asshole is fucking awesome. Cyanide Breathman I mentioned. Sleeping Bag is pretty fucking awesome. I Get Lonesome is amazing. I love that guitar riff. And I love his vocals and lyrics on that too. Force Field is fucking awesome. And Atmospheric Conditions is a really nice closer. It's just so much quality just spread throughout with just a few weak moments and it's just a good fucking record that is elevated by some amazing lyrics, like some of his best from the albums that I've listened to. Because Beck, for me, has always been about the music. I never really considered Beck much of a lyricist. That's just not what I came to his music for. Like, when I came to Beck, it was for the odd sampling, the weird musical directions he would go to. He's one of my favorite musical chameleons. Lyrics, not really much, because like some of my favorite songs, like Loser, it's just lyrical nonsense, But here, I mean, there's some legitimate, like, great writing here that I like really made this album grow on me a lot more than on the first couple listens. But I mean, what do you think, Brian?
I agree, but for different reasons, I guess. Or not different reasons, but like my favorite songs are different than yours, is the main thing I noticed.
What are your favorite songs?
Pretty much all the reasons stated. Beck is kind of like a lot of unique qualities. The way he plays his guitar is he'll let the strings kind of rattle. Always plays like down-tuned guitar, and he just straight up standard tuning songs. It's always down, so it's got this really low, kind of strange quality to it. Sometimes he's singing like normally, and he has this kind of almost talking singing kind of going on, but sometimes he also goes like on Ziploc Bag, just full on like pedal to the metal, full on strange, with this weird vocal styles. He's shouting all over it, and just compared to the other songs, just like extremely loud guitars and very
the production on the guitars is
not necessarily layered. I think they're just played really loudly. I
think there's very little production here, but it's been recorded pretty well, so everything does end up coming out clear. It's not like I don't think that this is a record that they sat and they're like figured out exactly how the guitars would be produced.
Right.
This really feels like a couple of people sat down and Beck brought some songs to the table and they played them, and it just so happened that there's just a lot of chemistry and with the musicians there. The songs were great, the performances were great.
There's another quality that's unique for him, the way he writes songs. Like, one of the most standout songwriters to me that we've talked about on the show and just in general is Garrett Lydiard, with his like very woeful and pessimistic takes and the way he, uses his writing to kind of express them. I feel like Beck sort of has that kind of dreamy or like abstract or artistic quality that a lot of singer-songwriters have, where they're kind of saying something but meaning another. But his is the one that feels very just like straight from his head. Like, he's not very, like, it doesn't sound like he's mulled on it for a long time, and sometimes the words he's saying don't necessarily make the most sense for what he's trying to convey. Right. But it does feel very freeform, at least here.
That is a characteristic that is layered throughout Beck's back catalog. He, like I mentioned, when it came to lyrics, it always just felt very improvised or nonsensical. But that's what really surprised me about this, is that there's actually a lot of stuff that you can pick apart with some really interesting metaphors and some really emotion. There's a lot of emotional moments on this in the vocal performance. Like, when I listen to Odelay, I'm not thinking, oh man, these lyrics. Like, I'm thinking, oh shit, the production.
Thing about Odelay, I actually think when you approach Beck chronologically, you can definitely see instances of his early folky career in later records, even on Odelay. Some of my favorite Beck songs on Odelay are Jackass, which is basically a folk song, which has lyrics that aren't really weird. Like, it's still Beck, right? But they're like you said, emotional. And then you have Ramshackle, which is basically a folk tune at the tail end of that record. So he's always kind of had stuff like this. And also with this album,
and of course Sea Change, like his biggest, probably his most famous album, where he went just full on acoustic.
I think it's Odelay.
It's Odelay or Mellow Gold, as far as I've seen. Those are huge records for him.
But Sea Change is big still. But to go what I was saying, the band setup on this record of, bass, guitar, drums, vocals, maybe an electric guitar as well, and the way that these songs are written around chord structures reminds me more so, I think, of Mutations than any other Beck record I can think of. Mutations came after Odelay, but I think around the same time or right before Midnight Vultures. And Mutations has a lot of like singer-songwriter-esque songs on it. Even though some of them are really wacky and weird. Like, it's kind of a precursor in a way to Sea Change.
Right.
And I can see that going back. I can see just the way the songs are written and structured. I see a lot of Mutations here. Also, it's good to note that there are a lot of bonus tracks on this record that are basically as good as the album itself. There's like literally another album's worth of songs.
Yeah, there's like 33 tracks in the deluxe edition. It's crazy.
And one of those songs is It's All in Your Mind. And that track was redone for Sea Change. So you can definitely see how Sea Change was a kind of a throwback of his style. Whereas people were thinking, oh my gosh, this is such a weird sea change for Beck to make at this moment. But really, a decade earlier, he was making relatively similar stuff, just far less produced.
Well, I mean, think about how Beck got really big. Like, his breakout records were Mellow Gold and Odelay, which have elements, but they're mostly like turntables and kind of like weird hip hop and just like dirty guitars and kind of bluesy.
We should definitely talk about some of those records later on too, because I think it'd be interesting to. I've not gotten into that sound personally. I know you two have. Maybe I should check it on my own, but I'm definitely more curious about that now, because that was actually what I tried to listen to first to get into Beck, and it was so weird so fast that I don't think I was ready.
Yeah.
Because it is really weird. It's weirder than you think it is.
But so he gets popular from those records, and then that's why when Sea Change dropped, hardcore fans would know this is nothing new.
This was a similar case, though, with this album coming out right after Mellow Gold, and was largely met with disappointment because Mellow Gold is extremely different. And his first bit, I mean, no one knows, no one's listening to Golden Feelings first, except me. But that wasn't my choice. Anyway, so This record, even though it has a simple layout too, I still think there's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of bluesier cuts, like what feels like old school blues in my very limited knowledge.
Yeah.
Like 14 Rivers and Mighty Good Leader kind of is in that vein, I feel like. And there's one more. Oh, I've Seen the Land Beyond.
That's a
I
good
feel
one.
like much older songs. They're Beck songs, right? But they feel like they come from an appreciation of.
Well, He's a Mighty Good Leader is a Skip James song, and then
Oh, okay.
Girl Dreams is a Carter Family song. So there probably are a couple covers, like the really old tracks.
I know 14 Rivers, 14 Floods is his because it's a song that he workshopped and had performed bits of or pieces of earlier on from what I remember reading about the track.
Maybe one of these days we'll get a folk or acoustic album that doesn't have any covers on it and just original songs. Maybe one of these days.
Well, it's still, like I
Mountaineering,
said
you
before,
dick.
it's a bit of a tradition.
I'm just talking shit. I've just noticed that like a lot of the more acoustic or folkier or country albums we've been talking about lately just had a lot of covers on them and there's nothing
like
wrong
June
with that.
said-
There's nothing wrong with that. It's just I want original stuff. I just want that, that's just a nitpick of
It's
mine.
just your preference kind of thing. Yeah. My favorite songs are the songs that just seem to be about living, like, or just not really any other thing other than living and like aspects of like the human condition or whatever.
Yeah.
Sleeping Bag, Cyanide Breath Mint, Painted Eyelids, those songs I feel like are the strongest in those vein of just sort of covering a lot of different topics about like Cyanide Breath Mint is basically like, there's lines about people only looking out for themselves. One of my favorite lines on the album is I bet they have plastic in the afterlife.
Yes.
That's such an amazing line. Like that is honestly like a genius level. Like if Bob Dylan said that, people would bust nuts in their overalls. Like that shit would, drain scrotums.
That's literally a line that I remembered from this record for a long time.
That stuck out
It's
to me
been a
too.
long time since I've heard this record.
There's a
and
lot of
choosing
great
to do it for the
melodies.
show. There are fantastic melodies, fantastic turns of phrase, fantastic vocal performances, guitar performances. Neither of you have mentioned one of my favorite songs from this record, and that's Sea Water.
I like that song. I was going to get to it.
What's that one sound like?
because,
It's like basically a slowcore song.
Yeah,
It's sad, it's downbeat, it's very bass heavy.
It's pretty much the only song on the record that sounds like a slowcore song besides Force Field. Force Field's the other one that kind of has that same slowcore vibe.
Sea Water
This one's a little bit
is-
stronger in that vein, I think.
I love the atmosphere it creates with the sound of the instrumentation and how nocturnal it is. It reminds me a little bit like the way early Modest Mouse records sound. Maybe is acoustic, maybe electric, but either way is kind of metallic sounding.
I think,
and the bass, I love how warm and loud the bass is in the mix, because that bass just kind of leads the whole song, in my opinion. And the vocals on the chorus are really affecting for me. I just think that song's very intensely emotional.
I'm
I
telling
just
you,
love
and that's so many moments like that across the album, which was a big surprise. I was not expecting a lot of the emotional moments on this thing, but I mean, they go over so well.
I think the reason Seawater leaves such a little impression on me is because I feel like Beck does have a really unique voice, like that stands out to my ears. So when he's kind of doing the thing he's doing on Seawater, I feel like that makes him just a little bit less distinct and stand out to me, even though I still like the atmosphere that song's, which is probably the strongest aspect of it. That's maybe why it leaves less of an impression on me than like, say, Sleeping Bag, which is probably one of the more, I guess, not sleepy, but it's a pretty basic track, I guess. But the best thing about it, I mean, the lyrics are just really, really good. The line about his clothes starting to shrink and the moon sagging down like a metal ball. Oh, and I mean, the ending is like, that's the line that plays the most in my head. The past is still the past. You know,
yeah.
he kind of goes up in his register very subtly. And tomorrow's just another crazy scam. It's great. It's just a great little song.
And I can't praise Hollow Log enough. I mean, the melody on that is one of his best melodies.
Hollow Log is like a wonderful folk love song, it seems. It's hard to tell exactly because in typical Beck fashion, it's somewhat vague, but not in a bad way. In a way that's very impressionistic and visual.
See,
I always like to paint visuals.
I didn't get Love Song from it.
That's like a classic songwriter thing.
Yeah,
too.
but I didn't get Love Song from that. I got more like just person down on his luck, but just seeing the bright side of things. And I don't know. I didn't get Love Song from that, but I mean, I just cannot praise his delivery on that.
Well,
track.
maybe it's both. honestly.
Possibly,
Maybe
yeah.
it's kind of a similar, like, I feel like you get that a lot in folk and country, of the song of someone who's down on their luck, but still, like, has someone else in their life that they
Right.
really appreciate. Because I think that the fact that the song ends with, you're the one that I desire.
Right.
I think it's more of it's like kind of like a rambler's love song rather than coming from someone who's perfectly content with everything that's happening to them.
I think it's like an absent-mindedness when I look into it. The walk until you're restless, sleep until you're tired, wake up without thinking. I think it's very much a person going through the motions.
Mm-hmm.
And just, get yourself a pistol, get yourself a dog. It seems like he's just saying this. And the song is performed so lackadaisically, too, that it feels like instead of advice, like, hey, you should get yourself a dog, it's like, do this thing that people do. It's very, like, aloof, very to everything that's going on. That is a good song, too. It's not one of my favorites. I guess that's one of my... This album reminds me... You know who this album reminds me of, honestly, the more I listen to it?
Who?
It's someone we listened to for the season. It honestly kind of fucking reminded me of Mount Erie in the way that some of the songs end very
totally.
Suddenly. It's more poetry over these chord progressions and some of the picking that goes on. And sometimes it just ends and it's like, oh, that song's over. I wasn't really expecting it. Some of them, like Asshole, of course, is verse, chorus, and as is... as are a couple of the other songs on here. But I think a lot of them really are just kind of a
like a vignette.
Not a vignette, just like, he's very much just shooting from the hip, like just saying things as they come to his mind, it feels like, even if they are still kind of abstract. And I think that's why it ends up being so kind of esoteric sometimes, is because he is saying artistic things, but he's not fully fleshed them out, which is for the better, because I still think what he had was really intriguing, and they're really relatable thoughts, despite their sometimes esotericness, or they go by, it's like 2 lines and it goes by and it's like, what does that mean? You have to kind of mull for a minute. I guess just one thing that holds me back from loving the record is I don't really like the explosive cuts kind of mixed in. Just they don't really do anything for me. Ziploc Bag is one that when it comes on, it's got like the big woo woo in the background and like all this, the Beck yelling, like the weird vocals, but don't really like that one all that much. And which one is the song? It's the much slower, like bluesier, like dig me a hole. Like that one's really out there. Can't remember what song that is off the top of my head.
Burnt Orange Peel?
I might have Burnt Orange Peel and Ziploc Bag mixed up. I think Ziploc Bag is the more bluesy one, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because I know Orange Peel is one of the faster songs. I'm pretty sure that one's the one with the ooh, ooh, and then Ziploc Bag is fucking the bluesier, like, dig me a hole at the beginning or whatever. I just think those songs are like, whatever. They don't really stick with me in any significant way. And I just find so much of the other stuff to be like the stuff on Painted Eyelids and Sleeping Bag, like those tracks I've named a few times. Like those to me are the most appealing songs. I think Force Field is just a little too slow for my liking. I don't really find anything all that.
I don't know. Lyrics are
good, but nothing. The instrumental doesn't keep me grabbed. The performance is really laid back, like a lot of the stuff on here, but the song just doesn't really connect with me or stick with me as much as the other ones.
My favorite song instrumentally is Outcome, hands down.
I wasn't really into Outcome either. I was kind of surprised that you all like that one so much.
I think
Outcome has a fantastic melody. It has
I love the delivery.
Really enjoyable performance. I love the vocal back and forth, and then at the same time, like that's just it adds such a wonderful variety. It's like a little splash of color to the record.
It is unique. It just doesn't. It's not one that stuck with. Like each track here is unique. It's hard to mix them up. I know I mixed up Burnt Orange Peel and Ziploc Bag, but that's not because of the way they sound. It's just their placement so closely on the album. But they're very different songs sonically. But Outcome. Even though I do remember that guitar riff you just mentioned, Chaz, and the double vocals over each other, it just doesn't stick with me that much. Girl Dreams is another one. Yeah, that kind of lacks a lot of distinct elements for me. Painted Eyelids.
It's super sweet.
It has the word "girl" in it. Of course, you love it, June.
So
it's great.
So Calvin Johnson is on 2 songs on this record and produced this record. I think this album was released under K Records, right?
Yeah, and that was Calvin Johnson's label.
Right, his independent record label in fucking Washington. Calvin Johnson of Beat Happening, lead vocalist. You'll know him because he's the only person who sounds like him. He's on I Get Lonesome and The Closer, which are both really good songs. I Get Lonesome is maybe the most depressing song I've ever heard Calvin Johnson sing on top of. Like normally, with Beat Happening, you're getting a lot of very sweet, childlike observations, or, they're very childlike. I mean, they're the only band I could describe as childlike, I feel like. Wherewith on here, Calvin's contributions are a little more melancholy. I guess a little more You Turn Me On than they are Beat Happening debut.
Well, his bass adds a lot to that chorus. It really makes it hit harder.
His voice is just so good on that last track. It sounds like a Beat Happening song, honestly, with Beck on it. Like, that's what it sounds like. And that being said, that Calvin's the only member of them there, but just the drumming is just screams Beat Happening. Yeah, it's actually such a fucking good song. I love Calvin's voice. I think my just growing attachment to Beat Happening is just sort of sweetening it up for me, but I really love There's Nobody There. Like, it's just, and then Beck underneath with the like da 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 da, da kind of accentuates how high his voice is compared to Calvin's, which whose isn't compared to Calvin's. Like, he makes fucking, he makes a deep voice seem like something high pitched, like a dog whistle or something.
Wow, it was great.
Well, I had a good one. I know I had a really good thing to say, but I got caught up trying to think of someone I knew who had a deep voice, and it just didn't work out. So, yeah, but Calvin's deep voice helps make Beck sound like a fucking soprano. But it's awesome. I love that closing song, and Painted Eyelids is great too. I really, really, really enjoyed this thing. I think just a couple of things held me back from loving it, being crazy about it, but there are tons of albums that are in this vein that I listen to and I don't get at first and just need a little more time to maybe
think this will grow on you?
To let me understand that less is more. It could. I think it potentially could. Just where I'm at right now is probably like a strong 7. I really, really enjoyed it. I just can't say it's one of my favorite or personal favorite, love records, even though there's some really, really, really good songs on here.
I'm feeling a light 8. I was about the same as you, Brian, but goddamn, those lyrics just really brought it up for me. I really...
Also the melodies. You got to give credit to those melodies. Like, there's a lot of really memorable guitar parts and vocal melodies.
It's just like, it's like what I wanted Golden Feelings to be as an album. You know what I mean? Like, because Golden Feelings is just an experience, honestly, but... Here, lo-fi, acoustic, but there's like variety in the instrumentation. The lyrics are like meaningful. There's emotion. Just the only problem is like I just think the pacing's a little wonky. I feel like some tracks just don't quite bring it. Like just some of the bluesier cuts, just while interesting, just don't really add anything that like other tracks do better. But I mean, just quite a surprise. It really grew on me a lot.
I want to say real quick before June closes us out that, yeah, that's a good point. It was interesting to hear Golden Feelings first, right? And like sit down with that one first. Because I've heard the other stuff a little bit. But it was cool to hear that than this because it's interesting when we listen to someone. I feel like, I'm like, oh, this has a lot of potential. I think this could be really good. And then we don't really do it again. This was like an interesting order to go in because I do feel the same way. Like Golden Feelings is like, there's some good shit in here. But it just needs to be refined or distilled or something, And this is pretty much it. I mean, I feel like this is as good a Beck folk record as you could get. If it got better than this, that'd be pretty fucking cool.
Sea change. I'm gonna give this a light 9. I adore the style.
Your score went up. Your score went up.
Yeah, and because I listened to it on Brian's speakers and I could hear the drums and the bass more, and I was just like, I just love how full and warm yet nocturnal it sounds. I just love. I mean, it's a kind of a lo-fi folk record with really well-written songs and great lyrics. But Beck has his own unique thing.
Right.
And I love that too. And I've loved that for a long time, and this just does not disappoint. I'm coming back to revisit. I just like it even more.
He says this weird twang. He's such a unique, like, kind of individual. It's hard to really say what makes him unique other than, like, the down-tuned guitar and, like, his very strange twang. But he also sounds like a city slicker with a twang. It's very strange. I don't know. He's a very strange dude, but it's cool.
So the album I've picked is the 1975 release by personal favorite artist of all time, Kraftwerk. As I mentioned before in our very first discussion of Kraftwerk back in season 1 with The Man Machine, this was one of the bands that my dad got me into. He gave me a bunch of CDs. This album, Man Machine, Trans-Europe Express, and I think Autobahn. So, like, the core Kraftwerk albums that, like, must hear, must listen to. I think actually Electric Cafe was one of them, too, which is more of, like, their synth pop stuff. But, like, the essential listens for Kraftwerk. This one stuck with me a lot. Man Machine is still my definitive favorite. Love that fucking record to pieces. But if you want to hear more about that, just go listen to our previous discussion.
Chaz, just before we get into this, you into Computer World.
Oh, yes! Oh, Computer World was one of the two. Fucking love Computer World. Yes.
I knew it, because that one is the poppiest of the bunch, and it feels like I know
he
you
just
would
gave
love
me,
that one. It's goofy.
He just gave me so much Kraftwerk, and I've sifted through all of it, but I wanted to talk about this particular release because it's earlier than Man Machine. June hasn't heard it, and I think listening to this compared to Man Machine will make for a very interesting discussion, because compared to like their essential listens, this one, Man Machine, and Computer World are, while Computer World is the most populous, as June mentioned, are like more robotic, while their other big records have more synth and pop, and not as electronic in the sense of like their image of being like robots, you know, like that whole shtick.
Because the Man Machine kind of has this futuristic quality to it. Because they're in the theme of that album, you can see on some of the songs, like Metropolis, right? Or kind of like, you know, that might even be a play on the old German film. I believe it's a German film, Metropolis, you know? So, yeah, there's a lot of future themes on that record. So it's an atmosphere and a scene.
So just to give people a recap, Kraftwerk, godfathers of electronic music, like one of the forefronts by using their krautrock beginnings with their keyboards, creating these very minimal, very futuristic, very robotic and mechanical sounds, but that would go on to, for the time.
This would be pretty experimental, right?
Like, incredibly. For 75, incredibly. Especially this album.
It still has that quality to me. I think you can still hear how strange this record is to this day.
And how influential it is, like, for the electronic music.
For sure.
Just explosion that would later go on. This is one of my personal favorite. It's not perfect. I think it have some flaws with it. I need to make like a list of like all my favorite Kraftwerk albums where they rank. Man Machine's still favorite.
I need your worst to best, my dude. I need your worst to best.
All right.
You should release it as like a separate video with just you.
Just me
That'd
rambling
be awesome.
about.
You should do that.
Okay.
Yeah, you should do that. That'd be cool.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do side videos. It's our channel. We can do whatever we want.
So, Radio-Aktivität, concept album, 1975. Basically dealing with obvious radioactivity, like apocalypse, you know, uranium, that kind of thing, but also radioactivity, like transmissions and wavelengths, and so like a lot of wordplay in the songs with the lyrics, but still has that classic Kraftwerk, very minimal synth, catchy melodies, really cool production, very robotic and futuristic, but also very repetitive lyricism and melodies. But again, they're a krautrock band, so that's obviously to be expected.
You gotta understand, it's groundbreaking at the time. So
yeah.
Even though they are simple and repetitive, and some, you know, when these instrumentals build on themselves as they go, kind of, if you're not really indoctrinated with older music, or, you know, you need to kind of curb your expectations a little bit, because it might sound more basic than you think, but you can also get way more out of it than you think.
And the thing is,
because,
sorry to cut you off, keep going.
You can get so much more out of it because, well, to be honest, I was kind of glad you spoke up, because I was out of. I just said, I said because, realized I had nowhere to fucking go. Thought you saved my ass. So.
Well, sorry.
Anyway,
I guess that is the benefit to me just interrupting you all the time. I'm sorry, Brian. But
no, dude.
Anyway, what's really interesting about this album in particular is that it's technically not one of like the canon, you know, essential listen Kraftwerks. Although I think it is a must listen for their discography, because if you go on RIM, it's not bolded. You know, Man Machine, Trans Europe Express, Computer World, Autobahn.
That seems par for the course.
But like, this album, it's like,
it's a little bit bottom half every time.
Yeah,
you know?
But this one, it's like absolute essential listen, I think. And I'm so glad June hasn't heard it, so I'm really curious to see what she thinks. And obviously you, Brian, because I know Man Machine really grew on you a lot over the years since we did the season 1. I love this thing.
A good pick.
Yeah, I love this thing. Lots to talk about. I'll quit blabbing. What do you guys think?
This is such a good pick because, like, June's heard other Kraftwerk stuff, and this will be only the second Kraftwerk thing I've heard. But I've also heard one of the biggest ones, you know, so I feel like that's an interesting take from each of us, right? Because you know, obviously you knew about it and you like it more than most people do. It's only the second Kraftwerk record I've heard, and June just hasn't heard it, despite how, you know. So I feel like, to your point, this thing is really good. I don't see the problem with picking this to start with or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more accessible, I think, than Man Machine. because it's
really,
more,
I don't think so. I don't think so
it's
at
more
all.
upbeat.
I disagree, actually. I agree
Really?
with Chaz on this because the Man Machine, while it is
Longer songs,
it
you
features
know.
some lengthier songs, I think that the lyrics on Man Machine are a bit more recognizable to most people, a bit more accessible. There's a lack of the weird experimental tracks that are scattered on this record in between everything, the weird like spoken word bits or the Geiger counter beeping. This album, I think, is very conceptual.
Yeah.
And I think that could, if you don't quite vibe with the concept or the atmosphere of the record, then you might not be into it. Also, I think that this album, the biggest difference that I can think of, this record compared to The Man Machine, or compared to Autobahn or Trans-Europe Express or Computer World, I think this is a sadder record. I think
Really?
this album, I don't think this is a very happy album. I think that when
I disagree.
To Autobahn and thinking chronologically, right? Okay, you have Autobahn, which is this very warm synth record, and it has the 20-minute title track that's like a warm ride on a summer day. You have Trans-Europe Express, which is cold and mechanical and not particularly super happy either. But it has that robotic nature to it, where they're not even maybe human. Man Machine is maybe similar, where it's about space and strangeness. This record feels more human. The synths sound warm, but they just feel melancholy to me. There's like a bittersweet feeling to this album.
That is...
From the way that the synths sound and the melodies go, it's just something that...
I think that's true.
There's something that feels tragic about what's going on here. I mean, and the fact that the record's called Radio-Activity, and there's a lot of stuff here happening with... Well, I mean, this is 1975. You know, we're still in the Cold War here.
Right.
So I think this is a Cold War record.
I disagree.
In the same vein that maybe This Heat was.
Right. I disagree, though, because the lyrical content proves otherwise, I think. While, you know, when you look at the album cover and you hear the music, one would think that. But, I mean, songs like Airwaves or Transistor or Ohm Sweet Ohm, I do get that human nature, but it feels really uplifting or like emotional. And the lyrics feel very like around relationship, like using the metaphor of radioactivity and radioactivity as a representation of a connection between somebody. I mean, like the title track, you know, radioactivity is in the air for you and me. Tune into the melody. I mean, when I hear that, I think of like a connection between somebody. I never got the sense that this was sad or anything. That's the thing about most of Kraftwerk's music and image, is that it always does come off as very robotic and mechanical and heartless. But when you read the lyrics, you hear the music, there is a really human emotion there that is quite their own. And they always do lovey-dovey. I mean, like Electric Cafe is just pure synth pop. I disagree with that one. That's a really interesting take.
I think that what makes Kraftwerk special is the fact that they ride that line so much. And I feel like their music can be read in a lot of different ways because the lyrics might not always match up tonally with the instrumentals. Mm-hmm. And that's by design. You know, it's not a fact of them not writing well-designed music. I think it's very artful. And I think that's part of what has made Kraftwerk last so long, is because there's that, like you said, the human element, but it's also mixed with something inhuman, mixed with something colder, more mechanical. And they kind of explore the boundaries between those two things. For me, this record was a little more human, but it was bittersweet. There was this level, there is sweetness, but something feels final about it. I don't know what it is. And it feels like a much quieter, sadder record than the records that come before and after it. That's not a criticism at all. That's actually one of the things I like about this record the most, because it carves out its own little niche in their discography. And it doesn't really feel like Trans-Europe Express Part 1 or Autobahn Part 2. It's sort of its own thing in the middle of those two records. That I think does really well for itself. And I think the fact that there were 2 years, they had released a record every year up until this, 1975, and then 2 years pass and Trans-Europe Express comes out. And I think that was kind of a big shift for Kraftwerk. I think that record was kind of when their image really, really solidified. And here they're still working with more experimental aspects and more just downright avant-garde at times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, Radio Stars being the big example of that, where that, I mean, it's experimental to a fault, I think, because it's like this repetitive, like over and over and over, and it's one of the longest songs. Or, well, sorry, it's long for what it is. It's actually not one of the longer songs, but it's just that repeated over and over with little to no variation. To the point where it becomes a little dizzying, and I'm not sure what the intent of the track is necessarily. That one, maybe the meaning eludes me the most.
I think that it sets the mood. I think that it puts you in the position emotionally and mentally as maybe the characters on the record. I think a lot of this record is conflicted maybe with technology and just seeing good things and then is noticing the bad. And Chaz, you mentioned that radioactivity could be played in two ways. Mm-hmm. You can have radioactivity, like radio waves that are in the air for you and me, but what's also in the air for you and me? Radioactivity.
Right. Yeah.
This is 1975 and everyone's afraid that the nuclear apocalypse is going to happen. So I think there is I do think there's a balance there, and it could be talking about the same thing. It could be talking about both of those things at the same time. It just depends on the way you read the songs.
What makes me
for me, it depends on the listen. Mm-hmm. I could listen to it once and be like, this is a happy, warm album. And the synths are warm and the melodies are relatively upbeat. But you listen to it again with a slightly different mood, and it's quite sad and bittersweet, and it's warm and it's still comfy, but it's also, there is an underlying sadness. I think this is a really cool record because of that. There's just this
absolutely
interesting, artful statement that they're making that can be interpreted in many different ways. What were you saying, Brian?
I didn't mean to keep butting in, but I just think it's so interesting that the first version of the album cover was the speaker on the front of a radio, and the reissue is the nuclear symbol. You know, and that just lends so much credence to that point, especially with, I didn't really think about this, the album being released, you know, in the midst of the Cold War. That gives the track Radioactivity, the title track, such a different feel because the sound of the synth on that thing is so mysterious and eerie, with the vocals coming in with radioactivity backed up by these super bassy, like, you know.
Also discovered by Madame Curie, or however they pronounce it.
Yeah.
All right.
Madame Curie.
And obviously she didn't discover, you know, radio waves as in listening to the radio, obviously. So the song can be definitely interpreted. And if the nuclear bomb's gone off, it's not good if radioactivity's in the air for you and me.
Yeah.
Well, there's the thing with the Cold War is there's a lot of subterfuge and spying and shit, right? Like there's and that to me
watch a lot of movies.
Well, that's what the idea is that not based on like a cultural perception of that shit going on? And having like
yeah,
and I mean like CIA members and shit have gone on about different techniques used during times which have obviously changed about, you know, it sounds crazy, but fake faces and assuming new identities. And so to me, that lends the track another era of kind of mysteriousness and this, like, speaking through the radio, like, who are you talking to? Like, it's a lot that I'm impressing upon the track, I'm sure. But I think enjoy that aspect of it.
They're impressionistic on purpose, and I think it's meant to just make an atmosphere that can be interpreted in different ways.
And also an opening with Geiger counter to kind of lean more towards the radioactiveness, you know, that element of it too. So like you said, it goes both ways. So I just want to talk about, okay, so atmosphere, you know, technology, how does it sound, right? Like, and I mean less in an atmospheric way and more in a tonal and kind of rhythm. I think this is extremely catchy. I think Radioactivity, the title track, is super catchy the repeated synth line. And the tracks are really linear too, so they really, because the repetitions they pick are so new and groundbreaking, they end up being really hypnotizing. And I feel like them being so enticed in the new music they were making kind of is infectious, because it really entices me as well. I feel the exact same way about one of my favorite tracks, Airwaves. I fucking adore the just wonderful, wonderful synths on this song so much. It's so awesome, and like euphoric. I mean, it's really euphoric, and the lines on that song are particularly artful. With like when airwaves go, it's like it's really upbeat, and it's kind of like a celebration of like technology for the time, and that's so like wonderful because that's not even something you get now. A lot of songs about technology or that include technology are so surface level and so placid in their observations or inclusions, whereas I feel like this one is like, isn't this shit crazy? Like, you know, I feel like this song is the embodiment of like, this shit is fucking awesome. Like, no one, we're the only people, we're the first people to do this, and we'll only ever be the first people to do it ever until they can't record this history anymore or whatever. But like that, it's such a fucking awesome song. Like, just that synth melody is like, it's genius. Like, it's just so good. It sounds so great. Antenna, amazing song, comes after the interlude here where you have a couple of things happen. There's like a news broadcast, and then the voice of energy speaks, which is very David Lynch, by the way, before he was ever even around. Like, that is, I think that is so fucking cool. Like, that is a very David Lynch idea, I feel like. And and the voice of energy comes over, and a lot of the album is in German. Some of it's in English. I can't remember this part in particular. I'm pretty sure the news broadcast and this part are in German. But the voice of energy speaks to people and says, I supply you with light and power. I am the reason you can do any of this radio stuff, like, you know, transmit airwaves and stuff like that. I am your servant and Lord at the same time. Guard me well, me, the genius of energy. Like, that is just such a personifying this entity. I mean, like, radio at this time is still pretty much how you get play, how you get noticed, like and how you get news. Like, it's such a powerful tool, and to personify it as this like omniscient, I mean, like a god, it is really kind of ahead of the fucking curve in a lot of ways, because it's technology is God now. People do worship it and have idols of it everywhere. It's just, you know, to me it was like genius. Anyway, Antenna, right? That was the song I was trying to talk about before I sat here and talked about how great the fucking interlude is. Antenna, another fucking great song, is this wonderful song about, has this awesome vocal melody with I'm the antenna giving, you know, talking about, and he kind of reverses roles. Like, he's saying I'm the antenna, I transmit you information, but then it kind of turns around. He's like, you're the transmitter, give information. You know, it's kind of the symbiotic process.
Harmonies on that track are sick,
so accustomed to it. Yeah, exactly. It's boom, boom. It's kind of similar to the first one, honestly, the Radioactivity one with the very rhythmic synths. Then you get Radio Stars, which is like, I mean, this like over and over and over again. I don't really like it. I do admire how like bold it is, but it's kind of long. it makes me a little nauseous, if I'm being honest. Then you get Euron and Transistor, which aren't my favorite songs, are just pretty good towards the back half of this thing. Like, they're fine. They're both really short. I just realized I said them in German because that was the track list I was looking at. It's Uranium and Transistor in English. What is English in German? Anyway, they're shorter tracks here. They don't really leave a big impression on me. I kind of struggle to remember what they sound like right now to even describe them. And then you get what's probably my first song, Home Sweet Home.
Yo!
This song is
one of the best
beautiful.
Kraftwerk songs, period.
Honestly,
so much emotion out of that song. Oh my god, the melody.
Yeah, I love it builds and builds. It reminds me most recently what we listened to that's kind of my favorite in this vein is My Angel, from Adrian Linker, in that song starts off with this kind of subtle, quiet, somber build, and then kind of breaks into this I think really euphoric and beautiful ending melody, right, that pretty much plays in this song. Same deal here. Oh, just a fucking great song.
Dude.
The beginning of this thing is so awesome with its melancholy, and then the sense just around like the 2-minute mark or so, they just kind of like very quiet, and then they just build into this amazing like rush. This is pretty much the best Kraftwerk song and also the best Sims song that's not in a Sims game. Like, that's kind of how because it does kind of get a little Simsy at the end with like, ooh. I love that little quiet in the background. It's like I said, the simplicity of these songs just allows the emotion of them to breathe so much. And I feel like the record is so much about these just conflicted emotions about technology and just living in this kind of world where the use of this technology is becoming ambiguous, morally speaking. I feel like there's so much more to this record to appreciate. I think it's a really fucking great record, despite some of its shortcomings.
We've not talked about is those goddamn transitions between the tracks. Holy shit.
This definitely feels more holistic than like Man Machine.
Mm-hmm.
Like it definitely feels like it flows better from start to finish. I mean, in terms of songs, like you said, transition.
There's so many to count, but like the one that always gets me is the Geiger counter into Radioactivity.
Yes,
is mind blowing. Like
it's just such a good stylistic choice for the record because all the tracks really do feel like these songs really couldn't have ended up on any other record except this one. I feel like they're so key to one another, and like you said, June, the avant-gardeness of this record is really what appealed to me so much. I love how vocalizers make some of the vocals sound on here. I adore it how robotic it gets sometimes, and also but then Antenna is kind of reverby. All the voice manipulation they use sounds very different, I feel like. And then sometimes you just get kind of the human voice on the title track or Radioland as well. Or is Radioland the one that's more? That one's the one that's really vocoded. That's the one that one's actually super super vocoded with the it sounds like it reminds me of the vocal melody on Metropolis, but the vocals are like vibrating, like that robotiness,
Mm-hmm.
It's like a bad connection, kind of is what it sounds like. That song, I guess what I'm talking about, I've talked about just about every other song. Radioland is another moment that's just pretty good. It's a little more out there instrumentally. It's got a lot of weird textural noises going on. I think atmospherically, every song nails it here. I think the flow of the record is awesome, even if I don't love some of the songs that like Radioland or Uranium and Transistor. But I feel like atmospherically those songs add so much. They kind of have their own contribution and really it just kind of makes the other tracks shine even more because how fucking awesome is Airwaves? Can we just talk about Airwaves Airwaves, Antenna, and Om Sweet Home? Just amazing electronic songs, just killer. I love this fucking record. I thought this was pretty fucking awesome. It was super killer, and I was kind of disappointed after listening to it a few times, seeing that it kind of doesn't really. It's like a black sheep a little bit, because it's just kind of placed in the lower half. It's like this record is cool. I think the artistry of this record definitely deserves more recognition in the discography. Now I've not heard the other stuff, so I could be talking out of my ass, but I don't know. I think this thing is fucking awesome.
I think their other stuff is more immediate than this is, and that could be part of the reason why it's simply and then like I said before, I think it's also darker.
And it's a change from
more
what they were doing.
experimental, and I think that probably also keeps some people away who are looking for the more sort of pocket calculator type of Kraftwerk, which I am not dissing Pocket Calculator at all because I fucking love it.
Yeah.
But, it's two different styles, two different vibes. I personally am going to go with a light to decent 8 on this one. Nice. I agree with Brian that there are a few tracks that I am not as hot on as others. And I think that in terms of the synth work and the melodies, they would continue to improve over their releases. But for every reason that I mentioned before, I think it's a great record and a really wonderful listen.
Yeah, I don't know. It's awesome. It's such an awesome record. I appreciate it more talking about it than I did listening to it. I think the songs that don't have the catchiest or most emotional moments on them just serve the atmosphere. I feel like it's an album's album where the whole experience is great. It's really greater than the sum of its parts, I feel like. Yeah, I would have to go with a light to decent 9. I thought this was pretty fucking killer, to be honest.
Fuck yeah,
decent
dude!
9.
Let's go, dude. The list. I'm coming for that top spot. God damn it!
I just thought
I told you, Brian. Some hard hitters. Some hard hitters are coming, Brian. I told you.
I know the Kraftwerk record, man. You fucking really dug this one up, dude. It's like when we sat down to talk about. There are two other records that are kind of it's Beverly Glen Copeland and Fishman's, where I sat down to talk about them and was like, these are really good. And as we were talking about them, I was like, maybe this is awesome. I was like, maybe this is actually awesome. And I just haven't said it.
It's crazy because the same shit happened with the Man Machine. The more we talked about that record, you were like, hold up, maybe the same thing happened.
This one's just I just thought, like, every time sometimes you'll sit down for the show, right? And you got to listen to something and you're like, oh, I'm not feeling this right now, but I got to get it in. So you kind of force yourself to focus and you draw in and you know, it goes one way. Every time I had to put this thing on, I was like, fuck yeah, I get to listen to this fucking album again. I was like, abso-fucking-lutely. So it was great. I'm hitting my desk a lot.
Well, that's awesome.
It was awesome. That really you stopped me from talking about it because it's fucking great.
That's really cool. It's not my favorite. I think I'm gonna go with the decent 8. But
hey man, that's cool. Maybe calm down because I'm not that hype.
I love Kraftwerk. One of my favorite bands ever.
This is like when we did Iridescence and you were like, I love it. 9. Now it's like, chill, it's got some flaws.
So the flaws for me come from the more conceptual moments. I'm not a big fan of the interludes and things. While I think they add a lot to the character of the record, I think we could have just used those minutes for more great songs because every like song in here kicks ass. And I mean the highs, Airwaves, Radioactivity, Ohm Sweet Ohms. I mean shit, like fucking awesome.
Dude, I just feel like those songs accentuate their standoutness so much more, you know what I mean? I feel like they're necessary, you know, even though they're not the like, you know, I'm not when Radio Lane comes on, I'm not like hell fucking yeah. I'm like, oh, what the fuck? I'm like, this is such a weird little journe we're going. And then Airwaves comes in. I'm like, oh my god, that's right. You have to masturbate to come.
But it doesn't.
Know? So like that's kind of the journey, right?
Well, here's the thing. You make a good point because Jesus, in the most disgusting way possible.
Don't call that a good point, dude.
But what makes it doesn't like ruin it for me is because of these transitions. It's like they had a concept and they nailed it from front to back.
And that's why your rating went up, right? It's going to go up right now, right?
To a decent 8.
Fine. I picked a sequel album by Tropicalia artist Gal Costa. Tropicalia music is this music out of Brazil.
Yes.
I believe, right, June? It's a mix, and it has a mix of.
Stop doing introductions, just flat out. Just
no,
stop.
I'm asking you. No, I know what the genre fusions are. I just can't remember if it was solely a Brazilian sound.
That's a fusion of Brazilian music.
Well, okay. So it mixes mainly Brazilian music with some of the psych trends going on around this time, and it's got like psychedelic guitars in it, but also there were shades of jazz and just
bossa nova.
Yeah, bossa nova. There we go. So it's a very strange fusion. I just remember on Gal Costa's debut, which is what we talked about the last time we talked about her self-titled. There were a lot of fusions that just stuck with me and kind of made me like it more in retrospect. I didn't get a chance to listen to it again. I remember there being a lot of variety on that record and just a lot to like. Gal's vocal performances were really good. And June had already listened to the second record, which is just called Gal. So it's kind of like another self-titled in some ways. But I wanted to do the one after that just to get one that no one, you know, not everyone here had heard, that you two hadn't heard, because her first 2 records are pretty acclaimed Tropicalia releases, and I didn't see why anything would change just 1 year out from those records. So I picked Legal. Now it's spelled legal, but I assume that legal, you know, whatever. But anyway, that's the dialect. So this album, okay, just my quick impressions.
Lot to say.
This album has some really explosive tracks on it, like the opener.
Oh,
and
the opener.
Hold on, Chaz. Hold on. I got to get my brief thoughts out. I'm gonna let you do the thing, but I got to get my brief thoughts out. Like the opener, the third track, which has like what can only be described as Fat Albert vocals. They're really good. The second half of the Archaic Lonely Star Blues, I believe, which is like a fucking great crescendo moment on the record. I fucking love that part. That's probably my favorite part on the whole record, is like this very slow kind of vocal jazz song, like kind of just, you know, Gal really flexing her vocal capabilities, and then just these fucking guitars come in, and she just to another level with her voice, with this very explosive climax at the end of that song. There's a lot of somber, slower cuts on here too, like the closer Falsa Baiana, and the track in the middle of the record, the here we go. It looks like the word aqua, so it's like aqua.
Aqua.
ACAUA with.
I think it's aqua.
Aqua. Aqua. It's got the Inya above it. I can't remember what that thing's actually called, but I think it's an Inya.
It's an Enya.
I think so.
This is about to just like throw some like Celtic New Age at us.
Okay. Anyway, so a couple of complaints about this record.
Say it.
Something like, okay, so the psychedelic guitars are way more all over this thing. There's one track where it's like completely washed out. It's kind of experimental. Like, I know the Tropicalia thing in general is kind of experimental in its genre fusion for the time, and it's kind of groundbreaking in that. But there's one song on here. Dexa Sangrar, where the guitars are like super burned out, like they're like trumpety almost. Like they almost completely change how the guitars sound. That one's one of the more strange cuts on here, but it goes over pretty well, I feel like. Even though if I don't love those guitar sounds, I think what Gal does over them is still really admirable. I think the album has a little less variety overall than the debut, which I thought was a little disappointing. The guitars are used a lot more on here. The sound is a little more basic. You don't really get a lot of that variety that's on the first record. You just really don't. There's a lot more vocally led cuts here that are a little more somber without this really textured instrumentation that I thought the debut had in spades. And like I said, I wanted to re-listen to it, but I didn't get the chance to in preparing for this episode. Now, I still like this thing. I think Gal has a great voice. I still really like the genre fusions going on here. I still think they write some really stellar songs. The opener, track 3, like I said, Dexy Sangrar is one that stands out to me, and I thought was really interesting because the way that those guitars and her voice kind of fuse. It's the most unlikely fusion on here, I think. Archaic Lonely Star Blues is maybe my favorite song. And then False Bion is maybe my favorite somber track on here, but they're slower, more vocal-driven track. It's just this great performance by Gal. It's very enticing. So it's a really good record overall. I find myself with not a lot to say because it's kind of just what we got before, but a little bit less on terms of the variety side and the textural instrumentation. I think this album is much more driven by Gal's voice than it is the songwriting or the very off-the-wall fusions, but that's still here. So it's kind of just like, and like I said, it's only a year out. It's really not that different from what she was doing before. It just lacks some of the more distinct qualities I liked about the first record. But her Gal Costa herself is still very distinct, has a just wonderful voice and great mind for putting some of the, with the band she's working with. I mean, this is a really, really good way, I feel like, to get into Tropicalia music, is just to kind of get into Gal's sound, because she's one of the most prominent figures, but also has this level of experimentation and variety that is super eclectic. And that's still here. It's just not as good as the debut. It is a step down. It's not the worst thing I've ever heard. It's really good. It's better than a lot of the music you're going to hear. But it just is a little less good.
To get out of the way, yes, self-titled, leagues better. This is still a great record. I like it quite a bit. The problem is some cracks were really starting to show after the third and fourth listen. After I did my lyric listen and my final listen, a few cracks were starting to form that otherwise weren't there on my first initial listens, because the first initial listens was blown away by this album. Because the opening track just explodes where it's like, oh shit, here we go. It felt so good to be back in listening to Gal Costa, because that was one of my favorite picks of last season. I truly loved that record. Super vibey, super experimental in the songwriting. The instrumentation was killer. Gal's vocals were amazing. There was just so much memorable moments throughout every track, and every track was distinct. It just had so much character and variety. Here, it's like we took this beautiful sheep with this gorgeous wool and just shaved it, It just wasn't a very good haircut. So there's a few patches left over, but the sheep is sad, and I don't know.
This is a big metaphor right now. This
album still vibes. That was one of the biggest things I loved about Gal Costa's music, is that it's just super vibey. I always think about tropical wallpaper is the best way I could describe it.
But better than wallpaper. I feel like wallpaper usually has a negative connotation. It's like a transportative more than it is
Okay, fine, June. A tropical painting. Jesus. Anyway.
That's way better. Wallpaper's a bad description. Wallpaper's bland.
But I love wallpaper. Anyway.
This is stupid.
On this episode today, Chaz has professed his love for wallpaper.
Chaz, if your life was a painting, it'd be a bunch of hills with just graves on them, and none would be taller than a child. This is every episode is what useless hill is Chaz gonna die on for no reason other than that he just believes what he said.
Yeah. Anyway, Gal Costa's vocals are gorgeous as ever. So many beautiful moments on this album. The instrumentation is also beautiful. I think the use of flute and horns are gorgeous and explosive.
Dude, I should say real quick, horns on the first track. Oh,
no,
that shit's fucking killer.
Yeah. Oh, mind blowing.
It's really good.
The opening track is one of the best songs we've ever heard for the show. Like, facts. Straight facts.
I nodded in agreement. I take it back. I don't think that, but I'm glad you're so excited. I'm glad you're doing good. I want to take back my agree real quick because I don't think that necessarily.
Dude, just when those horns come in, it's like, yes. Like, that's my kind of music right there.
It's a great start.
The slow songs on this thing, though, get them out of here, Chief. I'm not a fan. Like, they're great, beautiful vocals, beautiful instrumentation, but it's just like, what made the self-titled so punchy is gone now. Like, I don't think this album lends itself to be slower. I think what makes this album and Gal Costa's music so good is when it's more punchy and upbeat. We kind of get a Scott Walker situation here, just not to the level where I, just was so disappointed by it. Because I think this album, the instrumentation and the vocals are gorgeous. It's just kind of loses its luster for me. For a few exceptions. The Archaic Lonely Star Blues, I'm glad you mentioned that track, Brian. London, London is a very beautiful, slower song. But I mean, those first 4 tracks actually, awesome, just amazing. But like, we take a bit of a dip with Hotel dos Estrellas and Dexia Sangrar. I don't know, not a big fan of those.
Dexia Sangrar, that song could be really polarizing. Like, it really depends on when you hear it. Because sometimes I heard it, honestly. I thought it was really cool, like, towards my last few listens. But I remember the first few times I heard it, it was a lot. Like, I just thought the guitars were so... I mean, they kind of sound like tropical fuckstorm guitar. Like, they were burned. Like, these things sounded pretty crazy.
I love that that's one of my favorite things about this record is the way the guitars sound.
But the best slow song is the closer, False Biana, I think it is. Gorgeous, gorgeous closer. It ends so weirdly for me. I'm very polarized about the ending. I just think it ends so abruptly. Like, every time I listen to this album on Spotify and the track ended, it would just immediately cut to another Gal Costa song. And I was always like, whoa, that's it? That's the ending? I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of that. The biggest disappointment here, though, for me is the lyrics. So many of the lyrical content on here, and I made sure to actually dig through it because I really didn't do that for Gal Costa's self-titled, which I'm upset that I didn't. But I remember distinctly that June mentioned that some of the songs were very political, which I really loved because I love how this genre is basically just a big fuck you to the man at the time during the scene in Brazil.
Some of the people in the scene got arrested.
Yeah, and banned from the country. But here, it's kind of all over the place. Like, we don't get any political stuff. We get a lot of love songs, ? I don't know. The lyrics on this thing are just so eyebrow raising. And not in a pick apart, a lot of layers here. It's just it feels so random, but maybe that's just because it's a bad translation. I don't know. The more listens I got, it just kind of grew off me. But make no mistake, I still really like this record a lot because the songwriting is strong. However, mentioning the guitars, they sound amazing. The production on the guitars is stellar, but it feels so...
Talk about the lyrics, actually, real quick. This is, is she singing in... Portuguese is the language of Brazil, or the native language, right?
Yeah.
So this would be sung in Portuguese.
Yeah.
Okay. That might be why it was hard. I don't know how many people speak Portuguese, because my brain immediately went to, it's in South America. I was like, oh, Spanish, but I remembered they speak Portuguese in Brazil. And I was like, oh, that's not... Yeah, so it might be hard.
There's also other languages.
I know there's other languages in South America. My stupid fucking American brain just was immediately like, oh, it's probably in Spanish, right? I know, I get it. It's more diverse than that.
What was this?
I'm human.
I'm human. The guitars sound great. However, I think it just feels tacked on. It feels like, oh, we had this in the last 2 records, so we got to have it here. Whereas in the self-titled...
I think it's one note. I just think it's more one note here.
Yeah, because...
Not as much, those guitars do sound great.
When they come in, it's
sparingly enough.
And that's the thing. When they come in, it always feels abrupt and not in a good way. It's just whoa, what are these doing here? It doesn't feel warranted. Where in the self-titled, it's the fusion was an actual fusion. It just felt like so many different moments... Here it's just
I just think the record, the first record is more high energy.
I feel like this record is just riding. This record feels like it's riding off the success of what the previous two albums were doing. And I've not heard Gal, but I mean, for sure, Gal Costa, it's like, oh, you know, that album had loud fucking scuzzy guitars that are super psychedelic. Gotta have them here. But here they just feel like not as punchy. As much as I love the opening track.
I would disagree with that, Chad.
I don't know.
I kind of see where you're coming from. And I do see where you and Brian are coming from with your criticisms. And I'd say I agree for the most part that it's kind of toned down. There's less variety. There are less like highlights that are super, super sky high. I'm from the previous record, Sebastiana and Baby are two tracks that I just completely adore. And there really aren't tracks on this record that are like the core part of my very being, the way those two are. However, I love the way the guitars are produced on this thing. I think they fit really well, and they're almost the defining part of some of the songs here. I think the melodies and the songwriting here are, while more low-key, still really good. And I was kind of with you all the way into my last listen. I listened to it today on the way to work and on the way home from work, just blasting it in the car.
That's what always does it for you. God damn it.
And it always does it for me. Like blasting it in the car where I can hear every little ounce of instrumentation. I can hear exactly how crisp production is.
It's not even
everything
that
feels
like
so live. Her vocals are so.
Let me give you an example.
That's a great point.
Lovely.
It sounds live. That's such a good fucking point. It sounds like a live record on some of the slower cuts, especially the closer. And I think there's applause on one of these tracks. So I don't
Maybe
know.
it is.
When I was
I don't know.
into it, there's nothing about it.
Let me give you an example of how I feel about the guitar. Praising the first track. Love the first track. But the production on the guitar, it comes in and it's like only really in the right channel. It literally feels tacked on. Like it feels like, oh, let's have that awesome guitar that was in the self-titled now. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like it's part of the music. It just feels like it was there, so we got to have it here now too. I don't know. But at least that solo is awesome.
I think it's that it sounds consistent. I understand when you say you feel the guitar sounds tacked on, but I don't understand when you say because it was on the previous album. Like I feel like it's just being consistent with her sound, you know?
Maybe. Well, I haven't heard Gal, so I don't know what like the bridge between the self-titled to this one.
Gal is a little more hard rocking, actually. Gal was a little more guitar focused.
But here it's like it's so perplexing. While we have a couple of just punchy songs, we have a lot more slower cuts that are like good, done well, great songwriting, but just don't have the memorable punch that the other songs do.
I think that's down to the songwriting.
And when the guitar comes in, it's just like, what is this doing here? It doesn't vibe. It doesn't match well with the vibe that the slower songs set up. Does that make sense?
I kind of get what you're saying.
I get what you're saying completely, even though I disagree, because I've had similar feelings about different records. The first thing that comes to mind is Clipping when they have electronic like synths and stuff.
Great example. That's exactly how I feel.
Right. So I get that feeling and it's understandable. I disagree with you. I love the guitars on this thing. I think they almost define some of the songs here, but I get what you're saying.
I just love the drive-by shooting on Clipping that just fucking happened. It's kind of like on that Clipping record we didn't like, Chaz, right? Yeah, we didn't like that one and Brian did. You know?
I liked that record.
I know. It's just funny.
So, all in all, because I don't really have a lot, I feel like I got my spiel in. I don't know what else you guys want to say, but all in all, I mean, Gal Costa, singing is still great. The production is still great. The songwriting is good. It's just not memorable. It's well done, and I just feel like some of the elements just feel like they're there because they were there on previous records. It doesn't feel like this record has its own identity. That's the point I'm trying to get across. It just feels like
that makes sense to me when you say that. Yeah.
But I mean, the highs on here, the first four tracks, god damn, are just the bass on the second track when it so good, and that closer and some like the archaic Lonely Star Blues to the closer, great moments too. It's just maybe that middle.
Chaz, do you think it's like an album? For me, it's kind of an album of highlights.
It is.
I love certain songs and like and there's just it's like more than half highlights, but there's
just some elements really like the singing and the playing that just elevate a little higher. I think a strong 7. Like, I like this record a lot.
I mean, I agree with some of what you've said, but I also think that the arrangements and the instrumentation here are, I love the performances a lot. I love Gal's performances. I think the songwriting is actually fairly consistent. I don't think it's an album of highlights. I love it from front to back. Yeah, I don't know what much to say to express my difference in opinion beyond the fact that what you all like about it, I probably just like more than you do. That could just be that this is just my thing. Typically, I love this kind of stuff. Yeah, so like I love all the bass riffs and I love all the little guitar bits and I love the drums and I just love all the instrumentation on this. I wish there was a little bit more of the Brazilian instrumentation.
Yeah.
That there was on the first record, and that is on some Tropicalia records in the 60s.
This album also has the genre MPB, which was another very major Brazilian genre.
It's kind of like it's like what happened after Tropicalia. And it's essentially a scene, right, where they're just taking taking rock and pop and stuff, and it's kind of the counterculture of the 70s and beyond in Brazil. I really, really love this record. I do agree that it's just not as bright and shiny, and it doesn't pop as much as her debut. I'm gonna go with a light 8.
I guess I would rock like a light to decent 7. I thought this was still really good, still really distinct. I guess the best way to put it, just like really shortly, is still distinct, just don't like it as much. You know, it's really just how I feel. But still, I mean, loads to love here, and I still think it's worth a listen. I mean, this is still really good. I just didn't manage to, and I didn't love the debut either. You know, I just didn't. I like it so much more in retrospect, and I would love to re-listen to it to kind of maybe recontextualize it, but. I guess I feel about this one now kind of how I felt about that one then, as I just really liked it, didn't fall in love with it, but thought it was really good.
And like I said, strong 7. I think what would have elevated more if the lyrics brought some more to the table what the self-titled did, because then it would have made up for I'm not a big fan of like the music here, like the choices they make. If the lyrics brought to the table what the self-titled did, I think it would have just been higher for me. I think that's where the biggest disappointment comes through.
Next time is the last regular episode of this run of episodes.
Woo!
We get to choose whatever we want. And I think I'm going to try to choose something different from a genre that we rarely talk about.
Uh-oh.
This time we're going to listen to an ambient record.
Ooh!
And because it is chilly outside, we're going to listen to a very cold ambient record. And
Chillwave?
Substrata by Biosphere.
Oh, cool.
Damn.
Okay.
I don't know about that shit. I've never heard that.
It's time for some more metal on the show. My final regular pick is the crossover thrash classic Speak English or Die by Stormtroopers of Death, released in 1985.
I kind of don't have a pick really, so we're gonna continue the Wu-Tang journey. I couldn't think of anything I really wanted to talk about, so that's why I have a couple of these series on standby. So we're gonna do Return to the 36 Chambers by Old Dirty Bastard, which is chronologically next in the Wu-Tang saga. So this is so the Wu-Tang saga has become just, hey, I don't have a pick this week, but there's like 12 members of Wu-Tang, right? So here we go. We're gonna do Return to the 36 Chambers and get back to the Wu-Tang saga one last time for the end of the season.
This has
been Unwarranted Music Opinions. I'm Brian Courtney. I was joined by Chaz Jenkins.
Bastard.
And June Lindbergh.
Fuck you.
And we'll see you next time for a sequel episode. There's a big-ass thread coming out of my
What?
side.
No, Big Head? It's a regular.
For a regular, the final regular. You can just cut that in like that.
No.
This was a sequels episode. The next one is not. It's regular.